Hello, welcome to Eric Hates Games. This is a talk show about games, the people who make them, the people who play them, and everything in between. Each week we pick a topic and we all discuss. There's usually tangents, there are disagreements, and overall there are games. If you have an idea for an episode or you have questions that you'd like answered by our esteemed gaming experts, send them my way. Now, this week, our village is burned down, a meteor is hurtling towards Earth, and only 60 hours of power leveling will save us all. My name is Eric, and blah 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 JRPGs.
What an intro. Oh my god.
So, I guess we'll start with the fact that I'm going to try not to talk much this episode, and everyone else talk about RPGs. What's an RPG?
So, an RPG is basically a role-playing game. That's what it stands for. And in that, you're usually playing some form of role, but one of the most common elements in an RPG would be stats and leveling up. So, different stats would be something like dexterity, health, or strength. And leveling them up will allow you to do different things in that category. What those things are might depend on the game itself. For example, dexterity in something like Dark Souls just increases compatibility with weapons and how much damage they'll do.
Cool.
Yeah. Basically, just all those stats that you put out together make what your character can do in battle. So if you're gonna, let's say for instance, in Kingdom Hearts, they have defense, strength, and magic. You have to increase those stats by putting in hours of time leveling up, or adding items onto your character to increase those stats. Mm-hmm. But it'll sometimes have a different, it'll probably break down, make worse on another stat depending on how you put that item on. So it's basically risking your character by getting a bunch of leveling and different items to then go up against harder bosses and see which one works better for you. So you're basically playing as that. You're role playing as that character, but making him work the best you can in those fights.
However, that is an RPG, and today's episode is not necessarily on RPGs, it's on JRPGs.
And what does the J stand for?
The J obviously stands for Japanese. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know how obvious that was. But even through RPGs originated, you would say with Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop RPG, even that's American made. I'm not insane.
It is. No, it's okay. Totally American.
The series the genre really took off in Japan. Probably the first big example would be Final Fantasy for the Nintendo Entertainment System in 86 or 87. But anyway, what defines a JRPG? Typically, they have a big, colorful cast of characters. Typically a long, deep story. Maybe it'll reference mythology or folk tales, stuff like that. And they're typically very long, the shortest RPGs you'll find are 20 hours. The longest ones could be over 100 hours, though that is more on the rare side.
Yeah.
And usually there's, like I said, there's all the staples of what you described in an RPG. You level up, you have stat buff, equipment, you get higher stats. And should we go into the three types?
Sure. Yeah.
RPGs or JRPGs are typically categorized into three subgenres. The first one would be turn-based. Basically how it goes is you'll be on the field in the game, you're walking on a grass field, for example, and you'll encounter an enemy. Sometimes it could be random, sometimes you could see them and run into them. And now you're in essentially a very, very complicated version of rock, paper, scissors. You basically each take turns choosing your move. You could attack, you could buff your stats, you can use an item to heal your health, or you could run away. And there's, like I said, different attributes that can contribute. For instance, in some games you may get a turn a little bit more frequently if you have a higher speed. Mm. But obviously your general goal is to defeat the enemy. You'll gain experience points and then you'll level up.
And usually in those battles you have a party with you, so it's not just your character alone.
Yeah, usually
you have a bunch of other
you
ones.
have 3 or 4 party members, sometimes up to 5. The second kind, and we'll go into the similarities between these subgenres. Like I said, that was turn-based. Next, I guess some examples of turn-based would be Final Fantasy, Persona / Shin Megami Tensei, Dragon Quest, which was very influential when it came out.
The Tales of series.
Tales of series, I would say, is more action, which I'm actually about to go into.
Chrono Trigger?
Chrono Trigger, turn-based.
Yeah?
Chrono
Okay.
Trigger's turn-based.
Yeah.
And then next we would go into action. Action is very similar, except instead of being turn-based where you have to wait, there is no turns. It's pretty much whoever lands the hit first. There's typically buttons to block, so you could maybe like prevent some damage or lessen it. And yeah, these are typically, sometimes they may be more button mashy, or you have to think more on the fly. You know, in turn-based games, if you're in a deep situation, you could think things through and, okay, like, you could take a minute to see what your next
Yeah, it's
strategy would
basically
be.
just like Final Fantasy 13 or Xenoblade.
We're not going to go into the later Final Fantasy games because they get
But
to be a
I'm
weird
just saying
hybrid.
that's because I'm remembering how the game plays, and I remember just everyone button mashing almost every different character's abilities, while the other enemy is doing his own thing at the same time. So that's what I remember, and I just hated it so much.
I mean, it gets to a point with Final Fantasy where 15 and the remake of 7 now are basically just action RPGs.
Yeah, Final Fantasy VII was originally turn-based when it came out in the 90s, and the remake, which at the time of this recording is coming out in 2 months, is going to be an action RPG. Some examples, along with the FF7 remake, Kingdom Hearts, the Tales of series, which every game starts with Tales of, so Tales of Symphonia, Tales of the Abyss, Tales of Legendia.
Symphonia is my favorite one. It's my favorite
great.
number one game
I never
of all
played it.
time.
Play them, they're very
It's-
underrated.
Symphonia was great. It was the
But,
first Tales game to come out in the West. I still
First one
remember
to come out in the West that wasn't $500.
that wasn't $500.
Wait,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
That's news to me.
When the games first came out, they just barely got localized and got very few shipments, so because of this, price would skyrocket. But anyway, we're not talking about that. The last form is, and probably I'd say the rarest form of JRPG would be the tactical RPGs. These would basically be, all right, imagine you're on a small grid. Does anyone think they could explain this better than me?
Yeah, I got this.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to use Fire Emblem as the example.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Fire
Fire
Emblem's
Emblem is-
probably the most popular of tactical
And you're right,
RPGs.
yes.
How about
JRPGs at least at the moment,
That's a good point.
which is weird because it used to be very much the opposite of that. In the game, you basically control a unit or a group of units of soldiers that all have their own levels and stats, and you level them up through battles. And in the case of Fire Emblem, there is a thing called permadeath, where basically if any of the characters die in that battle, they'll stay dead, and you can't use them anymore for the rest of the game. So it adds a lot of stakes to the actual battles. So that's basically an overview of what one of the tactical RPGs might look like.
Yeah, like I said, it's a bit of a... It's probably the most uncommon of the three. Other than Fire Emblem, the two big examples I could think of are Disgaea and Final Fantasy Tactics, specifically Tactics.
Well, I'm thinking now. There's a lot of games like that on mobile. Like there's Languisher that's recently came out like a year ago.
Yeah, that type of
that-
RPG does work on mobile.
Yeah, they do really well, especially since Fire Emblem's now on the phone too. Like tactical is very easy to come by now.
There's even some games in the RPG genre that are kind of a mix of some of the three. Like Xenoblade Chronicles is a mix between action and turn-based, while Trails in the Sky is a mix between turn-based and tactical. So yeah, there's a lot to try, and I really would recommend many of them. It's my favorite genre.
I'm trying to play more of them. That's a fact,
Yeah, they take a very long time to play through, which is why it's.
I still have
some
to
people
finish.
aren't too into
I still have
them.
to finish Xenoblade too.
You should do it.
Yeah, I've been
Yes.
told.
So, if RPG, to my understanding, it stands for role playing game, correct?
Yeah.
So, what makes these games an RPG more so than, say, like a Call of Duty, where you're role playing as someone who's in the army shooting other people, essentially?
You know, I'll definitely admit, RPG is a really weird name when you look back 30 years because,
Oh,
you know.
Yeah.
But
Well, actually, I was going to say, the thing with classifying JRPGs and Western RPGs is that RPG in and of itself is a very broad term, and role-playing can just in general be very broad. So who's to say you're not role-playing when you're playing Call of Duty?
yeah, a little quick thing about something was not an RPG, and also a quick touch on Western RPGs. Western RPGs, basically, like I said, are European or American, anything that's not, I guess, in Japan or Asia.
Yeah.
That is
I would say it's like the art style or the culture that they signify.
Yeah,
in the
they
games.
typically. And another thing is, most of them are not turn-based. Most of them are action, if
Yeah,
anything.
a lot of them are action-based. The linearity that is more prominent in JRPGs isn't there for a Western RPG.
Typically
most
they're
of
more
the time.
open-world games.
There's a lot more branching choices and dialogue and all that.
Fallout would be a good
Fallout
example.
is a good example. Fallout, Skyrim, Outer Worlds, so stuff like that. Even like you can make an argument for Mass Effect being a Western RPG. There's a lot more focus on inventory management as well in a Western RPG that a JRPG simply doesn't have. Because in a normal JRPG, you just go to a shop and you get maybe 5 weapons, and you already equip one weapon on your character at a time because a big stat number go up. But in a Western RPG, you have all hundreds of weapons to choose from.
And
You're
it's
in different, and it's very contextual for different situations. Okay, I'll need this baseball bat when I'm dealing with this enemy, and I'll need this big gun when I'm dealing with this enemy.
Can I ask? Do you think GTA is a Western RPG?
No, it is not.
Well-
Because now we'll segue into my next topic about what makes a game not an RPG.
Well, let's discuss.
I was gonna
Okay,
say.
so here's what now games like Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto, why I would not call them RPGs is because you don't level up. There's no sense of gaining experience. Here's the thing, with the exception of maybe weapons, getting a more powerful gun, you're no different in strength at the beginning of the game than you were at the end, as opposed to an RPG where there's a massive difference.
I concur, because in GTA 5, there is a whole stat system on your character that increases your
Yes.
driving your
the
San
stamina.
Andreas does have, I'll give you that.
and GTA 5.
and you're shooting.
So-
and then even then you have the 3 characters, Trevor, Michael,
Yeah.
and Franklin that have
They all have their different
their
abilities.
stats are all very different when you start
And
out
only
as them.
and even on your online player, you can increase those stats all the way up
Yeah.
to that. And did you not know about that?
No, that's fine. I just
And there is a branching storyline too.
Yes.
That it's near the end of the game, but there are 3 different endings, and the
And-
story does branch.
And there's side quests.
And there's side quests.
So I think one of the main gameplay differences here is that you'll never in a traditional JRPG be able to get in a car and run over someone in real time.
Essentially.
Crazy Taxi.
Definitely
That
not
are
a JRPG.
I know.
No elements of a JRPG whatsoever.
Crazy Taxi, number 1 JRPG.
I mean,
it's
You
Japanese.
can level up
Japanese.
BD Joe.
there are a lot of games that have RPG elements.
Yes,
Depending on,
yeah.
some people may say Legend of Zelda is an RPG when I don't
It
think
is
is
always
all.
considered
The second
one,
one kind of
which
is.
always
It's an adventure
bothers me.
game.
Breath of the Wild, maybe.
But no, everyone always calls
No,
Zelda
never
an
mind.
RPG, and that always had just confused me. I guess
Yeah,
you're
no.
role playing as Link, but there's no stats or anything.
No, yeah.
But anyway, when we come back from break, let's maybe do a little bit more of a deep dive, a little bit more about how RPGs got big and some of the. Let's go in more depth on the bigger names. So yeah.
Perfect. See you then.
I'm Andrea Lucia, a graduate of County College of Morris. At CCM, I gained a high-quality education, was involved with clubs on campus, and performed university research in tissue engineering. My CCM education prepared me for ongoing success. Today, I am at Cornell University, studying engineering and performing research in cardiac tissue engineering. The professors and staff at CCM helped me to start right and finish strong.
Back to our show. If you're still here, that means you love us and we appreciate you. We were just discussing earlier about JRPGs, or Japanese role-playing games. We had a very lively discussion about, the differences between JRPGs and WRPGs and, all the stats and stuff that come with it. So what are we going to talk about now?
I wanted to go in depth about some of the most famous series. So I guess first we'll start off with Dragon Quest because there's an interesting thing to note about it. So for one, for the past 30 years, obviously JRPGs have been more popular in Japan. I'd say in the 90s, they were very niche in America, though fortunately they've gotten much bigger thanks to games like Persona 5 in the past few years. But anyway, one thing I would like to talk about Dragon Quest because even though Final Fantasy kind of laid down the groundwork for that genre, Dragon Quest was a countrywide phenomenon almost especially when it comes to video games. Now, I'm going to pull up something for reference. Now, when the game came out, there were mass shortages of the game, and I quote, sold over 1 million copies on the first day, with almost 300 arrests for truancy
What?
among students absent from school to purchase the game. People were stealing copies of the game from other people. It was insane. There were lines
great.
down the street.
It's like The
And-
Exorcist.
Yeah.
It's cultural.
Why am I hearing about this now and this didn't happen when GTA 5 came out?
Yeah, they're more mass-produced
Supply
now, I
and
reckon.
demand,
Yeah, okay, that makes
Supply
sense.
side economics.
Does GTA 5 have slimes, Edwin?
Ooh.
Unless you mod them.
We're not talking about mods, though.
But anyway, yeah, Dragon Quest is an interesting series where Dragon Quest XI just came out in America, and it's
Hey. You mean Dragon Quest XI has Echoes of an
They-
Elusive Definitive Edition
yeah.
for the
Hey,
It
hey,
came
Nintendo
out
Switch?
2
hey,
years
hey.
ago, but the Switch version.
Dragon
came out
Quest
last
just
year.
came out on Smash.
This is Dragon Quest. That's not the point. Dragon Quest was always a niche series in America, but 11 was finally its big break. While in Japan, that's Dragon Quest 8 we have right there for the PS2.
Yeah, we were just surprised by the demo.
In Japan, it's always been, like I said, massively popular. No release has been as insane as Dragon Quest 3, though. If you compare the best-selling games for America and Japan, you'll definitely notice a difference. But anyway, yeah, the thing that's so big about Dragon Quest, and I'll say this also about Final Fantasy, is that they're both turn-based RPGs, but they're very much the classic RPG. They follow some sort of plot where, obviously the later entries differ, but a lot of the entries basically are, you got this kid, he lives in a small village, he goes on a quest to find out he has some potential, he finds some friends along the way. The basic plot everybody jokes about is you gotta go collect like 4 or 5 MacGuffins and then defeat the evil lord. Along the way, you'll see like some mythology reference. You'll meet some sort of god. There may even be time travel.
You can
know?
fight God. You can
yeah,
kill God.
No, that's Shin Megami Tensei.
That's God of
Shin
War.
Megami
We'll get into that. But when Final Fantasy VII came out in '96 or maybe '97, that game was really big at the time because it broke the norm in aesthetics. You no longer were in this fantasy medieval type setting. Now you were in almost like a contemporary city. Not for the whole thing, but it really changed the norms and gave JRPGs more of an anime feel to it.
In 3 dimensions.
In 3 dimensions, it was the first 3D one.
3D.
But I'll still
it
say
really the
6 is
first?
also an amazing
Final
game.
Fantasy VII is the first 3D Final Fantasy game.
Oh, Final Fantasy. I'm thinking like first JRPG 3D.
I don't know. If it wasn't the first, it was the first important one.
Yeah, that's true.
But let's go into
None of us can name the other one.
Let's go into some quick facts about how big Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest are. For one, okay, so Final Fantasy was developed by Square. Dragon Quest was developed by Enix. In 2002, they merged to become Square Enix, which is kind of funny. But yeah, they're so big. Not counting spin-offs, there are currently 15 main entries in the Final Fantasy series. They all have different plots, all different continuities. Same with Dragon Quest, and Dragon Quest has 11, and that's pretty insane. Goes to show how popular the games were. Still are.
How many does anyone on the couches know how many films there are in the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
I think it's 18.
Like,
18?
It is more than 18.
Is it not like 32?
I think
more
it's,
than it should be.
I think it's around that range.
I thought it was 18.
At least.
There's a lot of Marvel movies.
There is a lot of
I've watched every single one. but-
Because when you were talking about the carbon copy nature of the stories, where it's like you're a kid, usually male, you're going forward, your village is burned, you have to save the world, you're the only one. It seems pretty similar to you're a superhero. Go save the world.
You're right.
Are you saying
didn't know
Marvel?
it.
Are you saying Marvel copied JRPGs?
I'd say the opposite.
Listen, I'm saying that humans probably have this psychological need for a hero that is fulfilled by sports idols and superheroes and
Yeah.
fictional.
There's a song.
Uh,
about it.
what was that phrase, Guadara?
Which one?
In awe of yada yada
In
yada.
praise of athletic beauty.
That's the one.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm
you
pretending
know,
what
like
that means.
as
So
far
you-
back as Oedipus the King, that's another example. I mean, I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's a thing. I don't know, but anyways, I'll talk less. But let's move towards one of the next big topics, which is
More types of RPGs or the next subject topic?
I guess favorite RPGs.
That
we
would
could
be
start
fair.
with favorite RPGs
All right.
going around the
I
couch.
could talk for hours, so I think it's good that
Yeah.
we're moving on.
Yeah, I can say
Favorite
that
RPG.
you're on that one.
Starting with that end, Joe, take it away.
Yeah.
Persona 5 is the only one that I was able to actually get interested in. Not necessarily because of the combat aspect when you're in the like raids, sort of, but when you're not doing that, there's a whole another aspect of the game where you're just sort of improving on yourself just socially,
Living
which
life.
affects, essentially, which I felt was like a really unique story aspect to it, because like, you improve yourself just in life in general, and then it'll make you better when you're dealing with hardships, which was like a story thing that I liked a lot.
So those two different systems intertwine.
Yes.
So you have the
Yeah.
life sim and you have the kill the monsters. And
Yeah.
doing better in one
Different
helps doing
aspects.
better in the other.
Yeah, different aspects from one will improve aspects from another, like improving your social, your friendships basically. In the social life will give you different perks in, say, the actual
battles.
battle area.
Mhm.
Like you might get different moves in the case of 5, or you'll be able to make stronger personas.
You also get some character development with the characters that make you like them even more,
Yeah.
and that's always a nice little plus
Mhm.
when you add that.
I guess what do you mean? I was gonna say Persona 4 because it's my favorite game ever. However, I don't want to be redundant because it's just same general synopsis. I would say a game called The World Ends With You, which originally released for the DS but has since gotten a mobile and Switch ports. What I really like about the game is it has a very contemporary, modern setting. It takes place in Tokyo, Shibuya specifically. And you basically have this 15-year-old kid who finds out he died. He doesn't know how, but he's still in the real world, except people can't see him. And now he has to do something called the Reaper's Game. And if he could survive the Reaper's Game for 1 week, he comes back to life.
So it's like Bill and Ted's
Great
Excellent
adventure.
Well, it's more Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. I think,
Yeah,
more
it's
than
Bill and
Excellent
Ted's
Adventure.
Bogus Journey, basically. Got it.
In
It's-
Japan.
It's a little more serious than that. Where the big thing is that all the characters you meet along the games are teens that are kind of going through a lot of like problems, depression, not having friends, stuff like that. And so it makes the story very relatable. The gameplay is a very interesting mix. It's an action RPG, I'd say, but there's still a very big focus on equipment, except you don't equip... Well, you do equip armor, though it's not very important. What's very more important is equipping your abilities. You use pins to do things like shoot fire. You could heal yourself. You could create like a bubble around you so enemies don't do as much damage. You could shoot laser beams, stuff like that. And I'm not even going to start into how to explain the combat in the DS version, but it's very interesting and makes use of the dual screens. I recommend looking it up.
I definitely gotta borrow that from you
Okay.
still.
You do.
I too was going to talk about Persona, but also don't want to be redundant, so I'm going to cheat by talking about Shin Megami Tensei, which Persona is a spin-off of. So Shin Megami Tensei, if Persona is lighthearted fun, which isn't always the case, the earlier entries are a lot darker than the newer ones. Shin Megami Tensei as a whole is a whole lot darker. You're not some big hero trying to save the world, although in theory you could be. In most of them, you're some demon or some other form of entity, and there's a lot of paths you can do from there. Usually in Shin Megami Tensei, there are 3 paths you can take towards the end game that'll affect the ending. There's a lawful route, not chaos.
Chaos, it is chaos.
It is
It is
chaos?
chaos.
Okay. A chaos route and a neutral route. That will affect various different things, and the combat in the game is this whole system starting from 3 onwards, which is called Nocturne, the 3rd game, that is. The combat system is called the press turn combat system, and it's one of the whole reasons I even managed to start enjoying JRPGs in general, because the press turn combat system basically gives you more turns for exploiting enemies' weaknesses and knocking them down and all that sort of stuff. And it makes the combat just so much more enjoyable and rewarding to actually sit down and think about, as compared to Final Fantasy, for at least for the earlier ones, where you could get through most of them by just spamming attack.
It was originally called a Nocturne system?
The
Press turn system.
Press
turn.
turn system. I'm sorry, I heard Nocturne.
Nocturne is the 3rd game in the Shin Megami Tensei series.
Oh, right.
Let's
Yes.
go on you, though. What's your favorite RPG?
I will always say Kingdom Hearts. because that is the first JRPG that got me even into RPGs to begin with. Mostly because I remember picking it up in 2006 when Kingdom Hearts 2 came out, and I remember seeing the commercial on TV, and I was like, Dad, let's go to Blockbuster. Let's go pick this game up. And I picked it up not knowing what the hell it was because I just saw Mickey. And then all I remember seeing, yeah, I know, right? all I remember seeing, and then after that, I pick up the game, start playing, and I'm so lost because of that beginning part in Kingdom Hearts 2. I was like, "Who's this kid? He's not on the box cover. He's like, this is like some random kid like doing stuff, playing with like a blue stick." And then all of a sudden, I was like, "Oh, my uncle actually owns the first one. Let me just borrow his copy of the first one." Started playing it. Just blew up with like story and everything like that. Beat the first one without knowing about abilities. and the scan system, so I didn't know anyone's health. I didn't know any extra combos. I just kept doing the same 1, 2, 3 attacks throughout the entire game, and I beat it. And then years later, I found out that was the actual possible thing to actually change my ability. So basically, I didn't even play an RPG. I just played a standard game that just didn't have anything to do with RPG. But I personally will always enjoy Kingdom Hearts, especially the recent DLC that came out, which made me super furious with rage of the boss battles that they had. But I completed it, had so much fun. Yes, it's not Persona.
You like to go into your favorite RPG, Guadara?
So for a long time, it was Final Fantasy VII for a lot of different reasons. But I think at this point, I would say that my favorite JRPG would probably be Super Mario RPG.
That's a
great
good
take.
point.
That's a
Yeah,
great
that's a
take.
good one.
Mostly because I think that every RPG after it should have timed attacks.
Yeah, I like that aspect.
I mean, I was considering bringing up Paper Mario,
Yeah.
but I like
Great
Rocket
game.
more.
Another game with pins.
Yes.
For badges.
It does.
Paper Mario is excellent. Go play Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door, and then cry when Nintendo doesn't make that exact same game again for more money.
But we got Color Splash, dude.
No,
That is inferior.
Andreas, would you like to talk about?
Yeah.
Just
I can
before we
just
end
imagine
it,
what
yeah.
game you want to talk about.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about Tales of Symphonia. So yeah, Tales of Symphonia was like my very first JRPG and is still my number one game of all time. I got it back when I was like 8 or 9. My parents got it for me for my like 9th birthday for the Nintendo GameCube. And I didn't really appreciate much at the time. When I was playing, I'm like, oh, cool, swords. This guy has 2 swords. Oh, look, monsters. But, as I got older and I was able to, actually understand what it was about, I loved it entire much. So a little overview is that you play as this kid named Lloyd Irving. Now, he breaks the tropes of standard JRPG characters because he doesn't just have 1 sword. He has 2 swords. And, he accompanies his friend, Colette. She's, like, supposed to be the chosen one to, like, save their world because there's no mana left in their world, and all these monsters and people called Designs are, like, running around and, like, killing people and ravaging the planet. So, he has to go with her and a bunch of other people on a quest to save the world. There's a lot of twists, lots of turns, lots of surprises, and it deals with a lot of, like, heavier themes, like more mature themes. I think also would separate a JRPG from a Western RPG is how they deal with.
It starts out feeling kind of like your regular RPG plot, though it turns into something
it's just
completely
completely different. It deals with a lot of like colonialism, racism, all these other mature themes, and I really would recommend that people would play. I know it's old up for the GameCube, but they also have
Steam.
It's on Steam now,
Mm-hmm.
and there was also a PlayStation 3 port, and I don't know if there's gonna be a Switch port, probably not. But yeah,
There should be.
Tales of Symphonia. You should play it. It's gonna change your life. Wonderful, wonderful JRPG.
But yes, I love that game and I recommend that series. But anyway, that's it for time.
Yes.
Got in here.
Yeah.
Please play
Don't worry.
JRPGs.
Today's real
Oh, no.
world advice,
Advice.
not advice,
Advice.
advice is health is wealth, and that most certainly is cash money.
What?